Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. I am R. Adam Smith, creator of this audiocast series. As an entrepreneur, investor, founder, investment banker, and board leader the last 25 years, I'm fortunate for my many experiences within the family firm industry. A warm thank you to our live audience on LinkedIn today and for those listening in the future. A brief comment on why I created this broadcast. Private companies are a passion of mine, having grown up in a family of entrepreneurs and having engaged for 2 decades in deals, strategic transformations, investments, and boards with an array of fascinating family enterprises, family firms, and family offices. I founded this series to offer a useful platform for listeners to hear from veterans, academics, and leaders in the vast family firm ecosystem. Whether you're a family business owner, building, running, or advising a family office, or just expanding your family office activities, I hope these conversations are useful and enlightening. And now it's time to turn our attention to our accomplished guests on today's episode. Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast. I am R. Adam Smith, creator of this series. A warm thank you to our live audience today and those listening also in the future. On this episode of the Family Business Audiocast, I'm joined by Jan-Philipp Ahrens, a leading scholar at the University of Mannheim and one of the most innovative researchers at the intersection of family firms and family businesses, as well as AI, big data, and sustainability. Jan, it's great to have you here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really. Thank you so much too. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. I'm going to talk about you a bit. So you lead the university's interdisciplinary research group for family firms. This is a global team combining business research strategy, data science, and computer science around the family business ecosystem, and also operating within the supercomputer environment dedicated to family firm research, which is wonderful. Your work has appeared in top academic journals, of course, including Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, Journal of Management Studies, Journal of Family Business Strategy, and also been part of many elite conferences around the world. And you're also a senior editor at the Journal of Family Business Strategy. Before academia, Jan contributed research to German foreign and federal ministries, collaborating with family enterprises worldwide. And he also speaks on a range of topics around technology, AI, sustainability, and crisis management. Jan also brings a personal perspective to the business. He is a fifth-generation family business successor. Earlier, he helped his family enterprise steer through the global financial crisis when he was younger. After the business was sold, it became a private foundation supporting sustainability and various nonprofit causes. Really happy to have you here today. Why don't we talk a little bit about the IRG, the Interdisciplinary Research Group for Family Firms, which is the specialized institute you lead and work at the University of Mannheim. So I'd love to hear about that first.
Yeah, really like this group. I mean, I was educated in this university. I was doing intercultural and international business studies, and that typically teaches you that there is not this one truth that you have, but there are multiple perspectives. So if you meet somebody from a different country, from a different context, they may see the world very differently than you may see it. So I was always a fan of the idea of having different perspectives and work interdisciplinary, which is not always easy, but it's also, once you make the different perspectives speak to each other, I think also performance enhancing and creativity enhancing. Yeah, so over the last decade, we built this team from 5 different countries, and the majority is female, and it's really producing a lot of innovative stuff. Research that we are now pushing towards the conferences and hopefully also into publication. And we always hope, I mean, that's the prime goal, to help family businesses. I always try to be as relevant as possible within the boundaries of our scientific system.
Wonderful. The IRG covers AI-driven and multi-method research around the family firm enterprise ecosystem using big data, which is very timely in today's world. It also focuses on sustainability and really digging into blending interviews and on the ground data with data science. And then you also focus on leadership and succession and governance. Where can people learn about the IRG, and how do you want people to reach out to you, to work with you, collaborate?
Well, at the moment, as you correctly say, we work on topics that really matter from a global perspective. So sustainability is one, and at the same time, the twin transformation. So we work also on innovation and digitalization and ask how family business and normal businesses can actually live up to the challenges that are currently on the table. Yeah, so typical questions we tackle is how can the firm be best configured with respect to the top management and other parameters. So we really ask questions like, should the family CEO be at the top, or should the governance be configured in some other way? And what is the role of other people on the board? Should the board be international to have more perspectives? What should be the ideal configuration of the board in that respect? So we're also talking about female leadership and leadership equality, and really questions that matter for succession. So how much enterprise experience in this specific firm? Should it be a family successor? And what these kinds of questions really put differently, how these parameters really play out for the sustainability orientation of the firm, the innovation output, and the performance and other parameters like typical performance, like return on assets and profit margin.
You bring a personal approach to the business as well because of your background in a family enterprise. It's not often that academics have that experience. So let's talk a little bit about that. The perspective you bring coming from the fifth generation firm of a global business. Would love to hear about that. How shaped your research philosophy?
Well, that's true. Maybe to give a more personal note on it. So I have this very typical background where you have a patriarch and a very strong personality. And I grew up in this environment having one of these uber figures that did everything right and were really performing so great. And then it's not always so easy to find your own path. And not even that from the family business perspective, but also from my other family side. So I had another grandfather who was a professor. My own perspective was always to somehow detach myself from these and to do it my own way. And then basically to earn my own stars. So that's what I always guarded. So to have a little bit of liberty. And that meant for me practically that I wouldn't take any money that I don't deserve from the family firm. So I would earn my money and only get the payment that I really deserve. And obviously that meant to work also in positions or in conditions that enable you to do so. And I was, I think, never afraid to do that. Or let's put it differently. I think what it needs is that you detach yourself also from the family worlds and say, okay, how would you lead your own life in a way that is actually worthy? And what it gives you is that it brings you the normal perspective that every one of us has, right? If you're just not from a family business background, and then you see all the things, all the career struggles, all the money struggles that people with a normal background have. And I think that's my personal stance to it. And then from the family business perspective, I think what it brings you when you've seen a crisis, right? So like our family firms, when I graduated, I basically had a job at a consultancy firm, but my grandfather called and look, we have a crisis, you need to work for the family business. And so I did. And seeing that crisis and knowing that there was a severe problem and that you have to shut down an entire production plant and lay off people just to get profitable again, which we managed to do, it teaches you that whatever you do needs to have some practical value. I never forgotten that also when I joined academia, right? So I think many academic papers somehow have lost this direct, we need to serve this purpose. Otherwise, it's not really relevant for family firms. And that's what we're doing, right?
I love that. I'm going to skip over to some topics here about this global perspective of leadership. And as you know, on the podcast, we've had some of your academic colleagues talking about the differences of how family enterprises operate right between like culture and national standards and philosophy and language and geography and national character. Like, been interesting to discuss this with experts from FBN, from America, from Deloitte, RSM, Merrill Lynch, your colleagues at Massimo Bao and Alfredo Massis in academia. So everybody has a different perspective somewhat culturally about family enterprise. I'd love to talk a bit further about what your perspective is of the family enterprise. So let's say not the family office, but the actual purpose of the family enterprise. And we talk about legacy very often on the show. Just love to hear a little bit about the differences of the definition, let's say the purpose and definition of the family enterprise across different cultures, like even within Europe. If you could talk about that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, and researchers have spent decades on that. But we also have advanced with respect to the definition. And that also lead us to build the supercomputer unit, by the way, that we're currently, I think we're the leading institute who does that. That is running algorithms using family firm definitions, and then automatize them so we can basically know who owns the world and who has a family firm around the globe. So from my perspective, maybe from a practical perspective, family business is the embodiment of the entrepreneurial aspirations of the family. It's to start in the real world of what the family aspires to be, what are the dreams of a specific generation or maybe of several generations. With that comes, of course, all the purpose and why you want to live your life and what you want to do with it and all that matters. But from a more academic perspective, and I think you mentioned some great scholars there that really may perhaps know a little bit more than I do know. But the way we look at it in our research team, we distinguish between two main approaches. One is the essence approach. So there's an essence with that vision that you have as a family and that shared notion of where we want to be. But that's hard to measure in quantitative data, especially because it's not on a balance sheet. It's something that's conversational, something that comes with multiple truths. Because if you ask the next generation, it may be very different what you hear than when you ask the patriarch or matriarch. And then we have, on the other side, from the definition question, we have the components of involvement definition or approach, basically, as we call it in research, which is more like, okay, is there involvement in board management or has CEO family background? And if you look at these components, then it's more, you can work more with quantitative data and with balance sheets. And that's how actually also we work, why we got the supercomputer environment ahead of the AI wave, which was really like a coincidence.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to do that automatically. So usually when you do family business research, you go through all the links, through all the layers of ownership and look at, okay, where's the family sitting? How much ownership do they have? Are they involved in management? And it takes a lot of reading. And I thought, okay, let's just automatize that and do it with the same degree of accuracy as you would as a researcher. So we built a very long algorithm for that collects all the balance sheet and all the data around the world and does that with 500 million firms, so 500 million around the globe. And we can now, it runs for, I think, 2.5 months, one run of that algorithm. But the output is that we can identify around 80 million family firms around the globe for research.
Wonderful. I know that Bridget Houston at Oxford and Freya Massis and I'm sure Martin Roll over at INSEAD and McKinsey, I'm sure they would be excited to talk to you about that. So I encourage you to think about that collaboration approach, and we can talk more about that later as well. The data also involves multiple methods, not just quantitative methods. So you have the quantitative and qualitative, sort of like in family firms, you have like the soft power and the hard power, right? So you guys at IRG, you integrate the large scale AI modeling, supercomputing, NLP, but then you incorporate the qualitative case studies. Like we see the qualitative case studies at, of course, Camden, FBN, Bridget Houston, at the Super Family Office study that she's doing, and so on. So for our listeners and for those that might want to work with you or benefit from the data, how do you incorporate both these methods across the qualitative and quantitative? It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, hi to everybody out there who's listening. So also the researcher friends. Yeah, how do we do that? Obviously, you need, for that quantitative approach, you need a supercomputer with a lot of random access memory because you have just two choices, right? Either look up the firm each time you have a new firm, which is a save and load function, or you put it all into one large random access memory. And we went for the second option because it's faster. And then, of course, the next thing is to add the AI, which we did a couple of years later, to that idea from the quantitative perspective. So we have AI data that we're working on basically on sustainability, because that's also a variable that needs to be somehow estimated or measured, because there is no balance sheet data in the big data right there. Yet we can measure it for all firms that have a web page, for instance. The same is true for sustainability or innovation. So that basically brings then together this family firm definition with really hot and interesting variables in a big data environment. And then, of course, this would be then quantitative, pure quant perspective, but that only brings you a limited worldview. Obviously, you need to, once you've found something, a phenomenon, and you have the regressions in place and maybe even the instruments to make it free of any endogeneity problems. You then want to have the real world speak to you. So what we then usually do is we go for in-depth interviews to really understand the phenomenon and maybe get more truths, more perspectives on it. And we typically, you see that also in our publications, you find that there is quantitative data and then you have power quotes from in-depth interviews that really bring some color to what the numbers say, make it more practical.
Okay. And then at the same time, you and the Institute are focusing on sustainability performance. Can you talk about why you're focusing on sustainability? And is that like a sub-segment of the multi-paradigm research about long-term sustainability? Or is that more of an academic focus or a personal passion focus? Or do you have clients that are using the data from you for sustainability? And is that sustainability like general impact sustainability, ESG impact, or is it more about the sustainability of the firm itself as a corporate entity?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And you're, of course, right into the topic of what's sustainability. Yeah. Well, to be honest, it's a passion, I would say. So as a researcher, you sometimes work like a musician. So you have a soundtrack for this decade and a soundtrack for that decade. So in the past 10 years, I think I've been working a lot on succession and more on the practical stuff. And then I thought, okay, what do you really want to do with the remaining, 3 decades that you have? And I thought, okay, if I look into the news and the current state of the world, it would be sustainability. And I really think that since I choose that as a primary topic, I really go to the office with a smile every morning. It's such a great feeling, actually, because you really do something that matters. At least it feels to me like that, even if it's just a very small part, because it's really also actionable advice that we produce. I mean, we've shown our results to the German government, and they're really practical also because you can tell people, okay, that's the manager type you need for the firm to be greener, faster. And that's just something we want to achieve here. I think at least in our economy, as a top priority. And how do we do that? And what kind of sustainability are we really talking about? So it's more...
Jan, just to interrupt you for a moment.
Yeah.
I've been talking about this recently about the misnomer or the limitation of the terminology of next gen and succession, because succession is often a human capital concept that does not incorporate the corporate concept, which is succession.
That's true. Yeah, I would agree. For the succession, you have a lot of human capital questions that really matter and that have a large performance impact. And it's so different for large corporation and for family firms. So if you're a publicly traded corporation, you have usually 6 years until this next CEO comes on average. And family firms, it's longer. That really creates also a need for different human capital, because in family business succession, you also have a lot of innovation going on and restructuring once there is a succession, which is necessary, of course, because for the last maybe 20 years, there hasn't been so much of an update as there has been in publicly traded modern corporation. Very true.
And also, next gen is becoming such an important topic because of the wave of the wealth transfer that is happening between the Gen X and the millennials. Of course, a massive wealth transfer, which is often either underestimated or overestimated. But I find the next gen terminology to be too limiting in terms of sustainability, because as we've heard from many experts on the show, and the data is that many children are not relevant to the succession of the corporation because they're not going to stay involved. They don't have the capabilities or they don't have the interest. So therefore, next gen is often, I think, oversimplified in terms of family dynamics, and I prefer to focus on the corporate dynamics.
I think that's true. It's very true that you need to have people that are interested and that have the human capital. Otherwise, it's really a problem that is called the nepotism, right? And that would hurt the firm and all the other stakeholders, be it the employees or shareholders. I did some research on that as well. So if you have somebody that is interested and has just the same human capital as an external, then choosing somebody from the family is actually a bonus, because you have a family background which materializes in extra performance. Because what is it? It's all the expectations that all the other shareholders mirror onto the next generation, and that's social capital. And once you put it into motion, the social capital transfers into real capital. And we're talking about money and performance here, because people trust and mirror all the social capital into the next generation, into this new leader. And if he's or she has the same human capital strengths, and if there is motivation, then it's actually good to have somebody from the family, but only then. And of course, you can see it also like there's a little bit of a family bonus. So you can have a little bit of a discount in human capital, so a little bit of less human capital, but only a small amount, because there's this family bonus, family performance bonus that you have. That's actually my ETMP paper that I'm talking about here at the moment. So that's pretty well researched. But I agree, right? And I think sustainability in itself is a wonderful topic to bring the next generation actually on board from the motivational side. So that might be a solution to have purpose in the family firm that would then bring the motivation maybe of the generation that to join the family firm in the first place.
Yes, that's wonderful. Super important. And just a quick question there for the next generation children, forget about the non-children, the next gen family members. What do you think the most powerful dynamic element is for their success to take over the business in terms of successor? What would be the one thing you think that is the outlier statistically that determines their success?
As a leader, first of all, you need to have that experience so that everyone trusts you and that you lead with integrity and authenticity. And that's something that not everybody has by default, but I think to a great degree it can be learned. So I'm a fan of having some sort of a test environment where, I don't know, your family gives you $1 million and you have a spin-off, and then you can show what you can really do as a leader with your own idea, with your own little team. There's nobody interfering and the numbers are just yours. And that gives you then the experience that you want to have and that confidence. So you want to have a little bit of that stars and medals on your breast when you enter already. I think that's super important.
Yeah, I like that. I spoke about that balance of entrepreneurship and family firm and family office dynamics in terms of the power of entrepreneurship, but also the risk of entrepreneurship with Professor Matt Hughes at Leicester for familybusiness.org. Last year, we had a very detailed conversation on that entrepreneurship element and the challenging nature of that entrepreneurship theory within a more traditional family firm. It's fascinating. A lot of research there. Yeah, I think Massimo Bao does a lot of research there. And also Guillermo Salazar in Latin America was also on our show.
I want to come back to that idea how we actually, the sustainability question you mentioned, what kind of sustainability we are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually, there are of course two sustainabilities. There's the one idea that you have sustainable management for the firm, so long-term orientation. And then there is the question about ESG. And what we're really doing with the AI is we tackle these ESG questions. The way the AI is actually working is there's a keyword list of ESG variables, I think around 25, and there's multiple languages they can occur. So when they occur, on the webpage of the firm, we collect them. And then what the AI basically does, it interprets the paragraph around the keyword hit. So whether somebody is painting the wall green or whether there's actually an ESG relevant action or text going on, right? And so that is something that the AI can determine quite well. Trained, of course, with examples that we provided. And from that, there is a score calculated. So how many true keyword hits are there occurring across the length of the homepage? And from that, you have something that is called then sustainability intensity. And with that variable, you have some abstract measure how green a firm is likely to be. And that was actually also validated with satellite data. The way this was done is there's European satellites from the European Space Agency that measure basically SO2 emissions in the area or in cylindrical areas, or no, basically it's in areas above, for instance, production sites. And then you have the amount of emissions, and then you can correlate that with the sustainability intensity the AI gives you. And you find quite a negative, significant relation between that, saying that basically once the sustainability measure goes up, that is AI generated, real world emissions go down. So somehow this provides a little bit of trust into this AI measure. But of course, it's just an indication. Yes, you should be careful with what you get there. But that's generally the idea. I think that's also the way how we move forward with our research, because one of the key limitations is that there's not so much sustainability data out there. Yet we need to find answers for our economy, how to get our economy green faster. So we can't wait for the accountants, otherwise the planet will just burn. And so this, although it's the second best AI method, I think it's just great because it provides answers that are really needed right now. And I think we will see a lot of these AI methods also in research down the road. And that really requires also to rethink how we run our research institutes. And you see it in leading universities around the world. I've just been to Stanford. There's so much research going on with AI or AI-enabled research. And I'm not talking about ChatGPT and stuff like that, but actually using artificial intelligence as a tool within the methods to reach greater numbers, to reach greater accuracy. And I think also, while there's also always a big question of, can we trust that? Just think of melanoma recognition, for instance. When you look at how we treat cancer, you already have studies that show that even veteran doctors are not as accurate as the AI when it comes to melanoma recognition. And of course, that's a very noisy pattern that you see there. But the same is true for sustainability. So I think this approach is just opening new pathways for research that we, at the moment, are just beginning to see and understand.
That's good. Thank you so much. I just would recommend on the Stanford side, in terms of the importance of family health firms and data, you might want to reach out to the head of the Stanford Venture Capital program, which is Elias Strubelev, which is our podcast last year. So he's the leading venture capital researcher in the world, probably, and academia at Stanford. And then on the impact side, I'd love for you to talk to Chelsea Toller, because she blends not only as a woman leader, but impact for next gen and super into data as well. You can see her podcast last year on our show, and she's a leader in next gen. So we don't have a lot of time left here. Keep talking for hours probably, but on the next gen side, you've referred to sustainable capitalism, for sustainable family capitalism. So you take the technology and insights, overlapping values, and sort of thinking about, say, ethical principles and governance into family health businesses, which is really important and very relevant to next gen. You want to just talk about that sustainable family capitalism and some advice and ideas for our listeners, especially those in their mid-20s to mid-30s?
Yeah, I think I'm especially thankful for that generation, because it also teaches us what we have been maybe doing wrong over the last decades and centuries with respect to capitalism. I personally would say sustainability would also include working on a more equitable basis. That means we should take care also to include everyone in the family next gen pool, for instance, also the women. And there's still a lot of inequality going on around the globe. But look, it is like this basically. So if we want to reach Mars, if we want to do something great as humans, basically, we can't just rely on only the male leaders. We must include everyone, also the female ones. If there's great human capital, it just doesn't matter whether it's male or female. And that's something some family businesses still get wrong, to also consider their daughters, that they may actually be the next great family business CEO. Yeah? From a personal experience, my granddad, he had 5 daughters, but he failed to make, neither of them became a CEO of our firm, which I think was just a mistake, because my mother, she was an entrepreneur as well, and she did well. She has that entrepreneurial blood, and many family businesses in Germany still go for the same decision. And I don't know why. I think that, for me, that inclusiveness is absolutely necessary, and as performance enhancing, because in the end, if you have a larger pool of potential successors and choose the best in terms of human capital, and if that's a daughter, wonderful. But if you don't do it, you're losing basically performance potential. Then the answer, better let your brother do it, I think that's just the wrong answer. So come on. And that's something, especially the next generation, the Gen Z actually was pointing out, that we must combine capitalism also with some sort of well-being and inclusiveness. I'm really thankful for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will talk more about that later. I actually have personally a nonprofit around refined modern capitalism, so we'll talk more about that. So just to recap, we've talked about the intelligent enterprise and family values and next-gen succession, of course, and blending values into the enterprise. We've also talked about the multi-paradigmatic research and multi-factored models, which is super advanced and complicated, like way post-ChatGPT AI, in creating useful data for the industry, both for academia, but also sustainability. And then we talked about the definition or the importance of sustainability beyond just the impact in ESG, but sustainability of the family enterprise. And I think, that comes from a global perspective as well, coming from your own perspective of being in a family business. I would like to, wrap up and emphasize a bit about the power and the scale of family enterprises. And I think it's important that as, a leader in the industry, I emphasize the scale and importance of these businesses, that they are quite massive in aggregate for the global economy. 50, 60, 70%, 80% of each country's GDP are technically family enterprises. So it's not like a niche segment of business. It's really a majority of the world, of the global economy. So that also brings us to the importance of sustainability and the risks to sustainability, which is essentially technology and also, big corporate companies, because the bigger companies can create a dynamic of have and have nots. If family businesses are not as dynamic and they're more rigid, or they're not as large, they can continue to lose out to bigger companies, which I guess from a society perspective is not necessarily a bad thing commercially, but it's a bad thing in terms of history and stories and legacy and family values, and the importance of small businesses. So I just wanted to wrap up on that topic, which is really back to the structure of capitalism and a more Darwinian approach to industry. What would you like to say to that topic?
We've recently been working on a new theory that is basically called the intelligent entity view. And it conceptualizes the firm within the boundaries of capitalism as an intelligent entity from a macro perspective. So something that gets poked with some problems, some challenge, maybe at a crisis or something, and then there's intelligent response from that entity as a body, as an entire thing, as the firm. And then we conceptualized that with some neuroscience and discussions that went on at Stanford and that are linked to the Carnegie School, and understanding the firm basically as one mind, one entity that responds to a stimulus in an intelligent way. And you can think of that theory in three basic, simple perspectives. And I come back to your question to answer how size would matter and how age would matter and how family firm status would matter from that perspective. But basically, it's like this. So if you think of the human brain, you have cells that interact in a neural net, your brain cells. If you think of the AI, it's processors talking to each other. And if you think about the firm, you have basically people talking to each other. So the cells and the processors are basically us, the employees, the people, the management. But from a macro perspective, it's just that it's a neural net that provides an answer to some challenge in a performant way. And there's actually research on that in the Carnegie School that says, okay, this is a form of intelligence, a collective intelligence. Quite well published, actually, in this journal, Science. Another thing is, so this was the first, the neural net. We have it there at the organizational level. And you have also some sort of memory. Humans use that to efficiently navigate reality, to store our experiences, to not touch hot things twice. Firms have it as well, right? They have routines, they have standard operating procedures, they have culture, especially in the family business environment. And so that's kind of programs that are stored in the supra-individual memory of the firm. Yeah, so there are actually parallels to that. And if you think about it, there's also perception. So we humans, we rely on our senses. If we see something, we react and we filter it. The AI does it as well. So there are sensors, not sensors, but there needs to be some sort of input, be it email or be it an API or whatever it is that inputs data into the neural net and into the memory. But there needs to be something like that. And for organization, we also have the same, right? So that we also have senses. It's a computer system, but it's also us, again, that are perceiving problems in a filtered way that are aligned with the organizational goals. So not everything that is perceived by the organization is a matter of relevance, right? And if you then think about it, family firms, so family firms, they have not only the capitalist goal, they have also a family firm-oriented goal, family-centered goal. And when you add something to that, like a third goal, like sustainability goal, well, you then have a third goal. And obviously, there's still a limited amount of attention that you can have or resources in the management that can process that goal. So from that perspective, like a rocket launcher that needs to track multiple drones, when there are too many goals, something falls off the table. And it's just like that also in family firms, because you have one more goal, the family-oriented goal, that's going to be a little bit more negative for sustainability if the family goal is not sustainability itself. And then the next question is, you talked about age and size. So once firms get older and experience stuff, they actually have a lot of routines and artifacts in their memory that needs to make sense. If you add something new, like a sustainability goal, to that amount of routines, there are a lot of transaction costs to make that new routine, the sustainability routine, work with all the stuff that's already ongoing. So it's more expensive for the large corporation and for the old corporation to include these sustainability routines than it is for a startup from that perspective of a mind. And it's just the same for old people as well. To learn something new with us as humans is just more costly because we've already learned so many routines. So adding something new is just more complicated.
So thank you for that multifaceted response. It's so fascinating. And there's lots of material there for our listeners to think about. Of course, I think we'll have to listen to that monologue several times, but it does make me think about the next gen and what entrepreneurs are thinking about their family businesses and whether they're actually going to care about running them, taking them over, taking on the legacy and historical information to sustain these companies. Because ultimately, if many of these family businesses and family enterprises are not effectively taken over and run for the long term, many of them will be sold. And overall, I think over time, that's not such a bad thing. But in the short term, it is a change in the commercial and business framework and fabric that you're talking about. So thank you for those comments. I'd like to thank you for joining today, Dr. Jan-Philipp. It was wonderful. We really talked about, many different lenses and thinking about the interrelationship between, let's say, the hard and soft elements of family enterprise, and then also the quantitative and qualitative elements of business, and that enterprises are increasingly intelligent, adaptive entities that require the human interaction, both the power of technology, which is obviously very tricky right now. So thank you for sharing everything today and for your personal journey. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. One more thing, Adam, if I just may add, if we think of the firm as that intelligent entity, the next big question is, what would adding the AI to that thing really do? And I think the next big thing that we will be experiencing is that we will be talking to firms and be getting informed answers. So I'm really looking forward to what will happen next. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jan. This is Adam Smith signing off. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Family Business Audiocast.